Welcome to SUP, the Super Urban Podcast, a discussion on cities coming from RMIT Architecture and Urban Design in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. I'm Ian Nazareth.
I'm Graham Christ.
And I'm Christine Phillips.
Hong Kong is a city drawn in section, stacked, stepped, suspended. A culture of building that has learned to fall terrain and threshold into one continuous surface. Architecture here is not a discrete object, but a system of adjacencies. Markets pressed beneath housing blocks, temples nested into retaining walls, gardens hovering above malls. It is a vertical choreography where the street has been lifted, buried, replicated, and rerouted. Its history plays out as a sequence of layers, traces, and ruptured chronologies. A British colonial outpost and financial port city, its civic and spatial rituals persist through abrupt political and material shifts. Buildings change function without changing form. Materials wear thin but do not disappear. Cultural continuity emerges less from institutions than from improvised design intelligence, embedded in everyday acts of repair, adaptation, and repetition. The city's compacted form stages a kind of cultural compression, where public and private are never fully resolved, and architecture becomes a medium for negotiating cohabitation, tension, and visibility. The threshold is always in flux, a shop spilling into a corridor, a shrine tucked behind a gate, laundry tracing territorial claims across a shared facade. Situated on the southern rim of the Pearl River Delta, one of the most intensely urbanized geographies on Earth, Hong Kong remains an anomaly. Its design culture resists the smoothness of the region's emerging megacities. It is textured, improvised, and deeply local, even as it performs on a global stage. A peculiar urban literacy thrives here, one born of constrained geographies and abundant cultural nuance. The same literacy is now under pressure from the slow erasure of civic space, the standardization of planning codes, and the soft violence of homogenized aesthetics. Does its architecture risk losing cultural intelligence to the logic of compliance? And is there still a culture capable of inhabiting the slippages between East and West, past and future, resistance and assimilation? In this episode, we explore how architecture can operate as a cultural infrastructure, supporting fragile economies, public life, and creative expression. We do so through the lens of Collective, a Hong Kong-based architectural studio deeply engaged with cultural and spatial systems across Asia and beyond. We are thrilled to welcome Betty Ng to the Super Urban Podcast. Betty Ng is the founder and director of Collective. She is a graduate of Harvard's GSD and Cornell University, an RIBA chartered architect, a registered architect in the Netherlands, and an international associate of the AIA. Her previous roles include senior design positions at the Office for Metropolitan Architecture and Herzog & de Meuron, and she's currently actively involved in teaching at CUHK with Collective co-directors Juan Minguez and Chian Chan, as well as holding previous academic appointments at HKU, NUS, and SUTD. She also contributes to the professional community through the RIBA, AIA, and the Aspen Global Leadership Network. Together, Betty, Juan, and Chian lead Collective as a design-led practice deeply invested in cultural infrastructures, spatial typologies, and the evolving role of architecture in cities like Hong Kong, where density, culture, and design coalesce in urgent and unexpected ways. We're recording this episode from Quarry Bay in the Eastern District of Hong Kong Island, right here inside Collective's studio. It's been a rare opportunity to witness the process in action, surrounded by the material traces and prototypes of ongoing work. A huge thank you to the team at Collective for hosting us, and a very warm welcome to Betty. We're delighted to have you on the Super Urban Podcast.
So, Betty, to begin with, I'd like to hear about your personal relationship to Hong Kong, how you first sort of encountered the city, not just as a place to live, but also as a kind of cultural system, and I guess importantly also as a design problem.
Hello, thank you for having me. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, but then I left Hong Kong for college to the US. And obviously, when I arrived to Ithaca, New York, I went to Cornell. It was a complete different setting. I would almost even call Ithaca at that time the countryside for me. But I really learned how to fall in love with the place. And it really does make me contemplate a lot about my own city in many ways. Hong Kong is actually known as a hyperdensity, right? But it is 78% green. It's really interesting. It's a very hilly city. There's a lot of country parks due to the British planning. And I think that is the side of Hong Kong that a lot of people don't know about. Which then, if you live in the city, you are consistently surrounded by slopes, which of course is very tough to walk on. But at the same time, hills and greeneries. I think that really gives Hong Kong a very special characteristic of it being a contradiction. Everything is sort of in tension. We have tall buildings building on slopes. And I think that's also one of the reasons why Hong Kong is so fascinating. Of course, Hong Kong is also known for having various, good pieces of architecture. But if you think about it, Hong Kong's fabric of architecture, in my humble opinion, is a little more generic. It's tall residential towers. They all look very similar. And obviously, you can tell which building is done in which period by the outlook because the building regulation changes. But because of that, I thought what is quite incredible about Hong Kong is not necessarily the individual architecture, but it's a fabric of architecture. The city itself really sort of is always kind of in border or in threshold or in contradiction or in harmony sometimes with nature. And that is something quite unique. And of course, Hong Kong is more complex than just a city because it is an island. But then it's also in very close proximity with Kowloon Peninsula, which is a peninsula that touches upon the mainland. But then between Kowloon and New Territories, there is this mountain ranges. We nickname it the Nine Dragon because there's like 9 mountain ranges. So Kowloon means Kaolong, 9 dragon. Yeah. So behind that series of mountain ranges, we have New Territories, which is a very vast piece of land where in the 70s, the British government started developing new towns over there. I would say probably the majority of population live in New Territories. I might be wrong. I haven't looked at the numbers yet. But then now particularly so because New Territories is indeed the exact area that touches the border to Shenzhen.
No, I think that's really sort of fascinating, and I guess it captures a really good sort of introduction to, I think to understanding the city. And I'm curious how your perceptions of Hong Kong have changed sort of over time, and I guess how do you move through the city or read the city differently as as both sort of a resident, a critical thinker, and an architect and designer?
That's a very loaded question. I think particularly asking someone who was born and raised here, and I was away for around 15 years, and 10 years ago I came home. I thought it was, personally for me, an incredible experience to be back because having lived outside for 15 years, I was very, very fortunate to have gained a lot of insights living in various culture. I've lived in Europe, in the US. I have worked in places like in Russia or Scandinavia. I've lived also in Italy and Rome. There's just all these clashing differences that makes me realize it is very fascinating and important to live life as, in quote, a foreigner. Yeah. I'm so glad to be home right now, but at the same time still maintain a certain so-called lens to see my own hometown always with an open mind. Yeah. I try not to take things for granted, which then in Hong Kong is very hard because Hong Kong is an extremely efficient city. We have, I believe, 6,000 square kilometers of space, but then we have around 7.2 million people, if I'm not mistaken. But then 78% are green. So you can imagine that hyperdensity in the built area. But then we have 3 underwater tunnels. Right. Just to cross the Victoria Harbour. And if you take an old school ferry, it only takes you 7 minutes. Yeah. So you can think of all these, like, as I mentioned, ridiculous contradiction, but at the same time, being a person that lives in Hong Kong, you would take it for granted, right? Like that kind of swiftness to circulate around the city, that efficiency. But at the same time, coming back home, I do realize how incredible Hong Kong is in its infrastructure. Just a very, perhaps a fun fact, like not really fun, but important. In the 70s and 80s, due to the landscape of Hong Kong, there's a lot of slope. We have a lot of landslide. Because we are located in a subtropical climate, there's a lot of typhoons. And at that time, it was not fun. A lot of people lost their lives. It was extremely dangerous. And a lot of tall buildings were built against the slope. But then I would like to really, credit the highway department here. The infrastructure in Hong Kong is really well done. They really went through a whole ordeal of relooking into the city, reinforcing the slope, creating extremely great drainage projects, and landslide seldom happens these days. Yeah. And I think as a person growing up in Hong Kong, seeing the response to infrastructure to create a better life for people here in this tiny city is actually quite incredible. As I also mentioned, we have 3 underwater tunnels. We are a city of only 6,000 square kilometers. I always found that extremely fascinating. And all the bridges that the city has built, for example, connecting to Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and Macau, these kind of infrastructural project is really rare in the world. And I would say Hong Kong does it really extremely well. Yeah. Again, that contradiction of growing up here, you sort of know everything about Hong Kong. You feel like you do, but I don't really. There's just so much happening, and I feel like every weekend I really wanted to go out and see something new. I have to admit, confess that I don't know my city very, very well until now. I haven't visited all beaches, for example. Hong Kong have great beaches because we have a very, very long coastline. So I'm really totally, into being in Hong Kong right now, having a great time. Again, mentioning infrastructure, Hong Kong has also an amazing airport. And that really allows a lot of us to travel very swiftly to every part of the world. And that really has also facilitated our studio working on projects all over the world also. And that is something that I feel very, very good about, being here. It is a city of connection. It is a city of hyper efficiency. I feel like I'm only talking about the good things of Hong Kong right now. Yeah, there's definitely frustrating things.
Yeah, I think that's a really kind of important aspect of cities that they do. Really good cities actually are capable of holding those contradictions at the same time, and I think that becomes a really important property of them. Even thinking about sort of infrastructure and it's always that balance between what is efficient versus what might be necessary or what is redundant. And I think we often kind of trying to deal with that from the numbers perspective and thinking about how cities evolve over time. But it's great to hear that there's been that idea of response in the city to actually navigating those issues more clearly. Also thinking about a lot of your discussions of comparing your experiences in Hong Kong with other cities around the world, and there I'm also noting that many cities do claim to be global or hybrid or culturally dense. Is there something within those kind of terms that makes Hong Kong uniquely global, uniquely hybrid, and uniquely sort of culturally dense? Yeah.
I feel like what I've shared earlier in terms of the robustness of infrastructure definitely have allowed Hong Kong to be a very, very global city. It is obviously more complex than that. Of course, also the legal and financial system. Hong Kong is indeed a financial hub, and it still is. Hong Kong used to have a secondary industry, which is manufacturing, light manufacturing in the 70s, very well known for electronics and toys. Yeah. Obviously, with China opening up in the late 70s, early 80s, that sort of manufacturing has moved to mainland. Yeah. And Hong Kong stays a financial center. Yeah, which then, of course, is something that Hong Kong is very proud of and extremely good at. I think one thing that potentially interesting to touch upon is that the idea of providing a service, particularly in finance, is very prominent in Hong Kong. The idea of creation or manufacturing or production is a bit less prominent in Hong Kong. Yeah. So since you ask about cultural production, I think this is something might be interesting to touch upon because our office also work a lot on cultural projects. Yeah. And I feel like in the so-called old times, Hong Kong was called the cultural desert. Not a great name, yeah. But then that it really initiated a lot of very interesting projects, understanding there's certain latency in this city in terms of cultural production. A lot of the cultural production were very difficult at that time because you don't necessarily so-called make a living out of it, yeah. And it has fallen into the genre of cultural consumption. Yeah, Hong Kong does attract a lot of, let's say, big institution, performing arts coming here. And how do we actually, make people in Hong Kong understand that culture is not purely for consumption, but culture is actually work? And I think in the last 20 years, Hong Kong has been doing an amazing job. I was very, very lucky. In 2009, I rejoined OMA, and I moved to Hong Kong and helped set up a Hong Kong office together with a team of colleagues working on the West Kowloon Cultural District Master Plan. That was a really interesting moment for me as a Hong Kong person. Because I have never thought of the government hiring OMA, such a special avant-garde firm to come and relook how cultural production can be generated in our city. It was an extremely fascinating experience, and that was sort of a beginning of everything. Now West Kowloon Cultural District has become a really popular public space. There's a park that I believe is the only park that dogs are allowed. That's a big deal, with a great view, obviously, to Hong Kong Island, the skyline. But then, of course, we have these amazing institutions. Excuse me. Of course, we also have these amazing institutions like the M+ Museum, the Palace Museum, the CG Center. CG means Chinese opera. So the Lyric Theatre is also under construction right now. But of course, having these physical buildings doesn't mean they're great, right? But the programming is actually really amazing. We have worked a lot with also M+ Museum. We designed a few of the exhibitions, and my partner, we co-run collective. She has participated in also the construction of M+ Museum and also Tycoon, which is the renovation of the old Victoria prison and the Central Police Station. So these projects really have injected a very, very high energy of cultural production and cultural consumption altogether, creating wonderful program. And Hong Kong has now, I think, really nurtured a bunch of great cultural workers curators, people who design exhibitions like ourselves, people who know about art production and creating events and programs. It's getting more and more mature and extremely interesting. So I really have great feeling about the cultural production in Hong Kong right now, and we are very glad to be part of that. One of the reasons is we work with artists. We work with museums, we work with galleries, we work with art consultancy, we work with curators, we're even working with art storages right now. Right. And this various spectrum of work that we partner with different players of the art ecology has really allowed us to really look deep into the ecology in Hong Kong relating to cultural production. So I think that we're very fortunate to be able to participate in that and see how it has evolved and still evolving. Yeah.
No, I think that's it's sort of a really fascinating kind of look at the I guess some degree the resilience of the cultural sector in Hong Kong, and also I think trying to get a sense of what the architectural responses or how architecture operates within a kind of ecosystem. And I think it's really fantastic to know about the the collaborations with a whole range of sort of professions that exist within that space. And I was also curious about what happens when we often treat sort of these cultural kind of institutions or their buildings as sort of icons or isolated icons, at least from an outsider's perspective. And just curious about what do we miss when we do that, and we kind of not really engage with the whole kind of infrastructural ecosystem of them.
Your question lies in the interest of understanding how Hong Kong deal with the star architect buildings, or?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of like I think we can mistakenly kind of look at these buildings as as icons or institutions, and as a result we might sort of miss the kind of ecosystem that sustains it. And I'm just curious about what you think in working through these projects at various different scales and through various different kind of agencies, some as architect, some as a kind of analyst or researcher, and some as kind of engaging with installations. How do you see that kind of landscape? Yeah.
Hong Kong is a very young city, and I mean, growing up, seeing all these amazing buildings getting built, in particular, for example, HSBC, by Norman Foster in the 80s, it was quite incredible. And, that was when I am more a consumer of architecture, right? I look at it and I felt like, wow, this is so cool. Never thought of being an architect until I was older. And when I became an architect, particularly returning home to start my own studio, it really did hit me in terms of what is this architectural design ecology we have in Hong Kong. We don't have a lot of small buildings to build here. Unlike where you're from, single family houses, it's sort of kind of the main source for, let's say, small size or medium sized firm to work on. Hong Kong doesn't really have that. There's very little people who can actually afford a single family house here. So we need to kind of look into the genre of architecture. It has a lot to do with large size development, and almost every residential project will be a tower. And that's already very different, right, compared to in Australia or in Melbourne. In that sense, I do think with the very short architectural history in Hong Kong, which is probably not more than 100 years, I do think it's extremely encouraging to see all these amazing buildings being built in Hong Kong, with Paul Rudolph's building, Norman Foster, and recently we have Zaha Hadid doing the Henderson Tower, which we as a new generation of architects in this city, we're extremely glad we get to participate in a way with this new tower, because we built the Christie's Asian APAC headquarters inside the tower for 4 levels. And being able to witness and participate as part of it, I found that very encouraging. I want to be positive about it because it's very easy for us to complain, oh, young architects don't have chances, which is very true because in Hong Kong there is not a system of, let's say, an open competition necessarily, which is a very big pity, which I hope it will happen more often because when I look at, or when myself and my co-directors and our team look at the buildings being built in Hong Kong, we also thought, we can do that. Like, we totally have the capability and experience, but how do we land these projects? And I do hope the understanding of Hong Kong being capable in accommodating and build these high-level buildings in the last, let's say, 50, 60 years is actually a gesture to the potential clients in our city that young firm here can also do the same. We have had the privilege to learn from these buildings in our own city, and we also, me personally, have the privilege, very fortunate to be able to work overseas, educated overseas, having seen so many different ways of building and design in the world and bring them back in Hong Kong. I do hope we can lead by action. We have the opportunity 7 years ago to do our first building, which is in Kowloon, and it was a very complicated building. I think it's the first step for us to show that local bred and, let's say, smaller size firm can do equally good projects. I do have very great positive hope that the ecology of architecture is getting more and more open to, let's say, local, smaller size firm.
really great piece of sound in the break was from Judith Heyman, Berlin-based Australian cellist, improviser and organiser of sounds. The piece was called Neither From Nor Towards.
I think that's a really good sort of segue to maybe talking a bit more about collective, and as I kind of see it from outside, it's sort of a very research and concept driven practice, and I think it largely also offers powerful architectural narratives and and also maybe even counter narratives about how we can understand the building anew. And it also draws from the formative experiences of you and your co-directors that have all kind of worked with or trained with very critical international architectural practices, and also perhaps at a particular time when the sort of term of the star architect existed to some degree. But what's really interesting about collective is that it sort of challenges that notion to a large degree through I guess the idea of authorship, or and even kind of operating through partnerships and collaborations and maybe even site-specific inquiry. So maybe you could talk about how that sort of has been a response to both the city and your formative kind of conditions. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the kind words. It's really beautiful for us to hear how you describe us. We don't hear enough of how people see us, and thank you so much. Yeah, it's a topic that I'm extremely interested in talking about, because it's not about talking. It's not necessarily about talking about our studio, but it's architecture is so much about apprenticeship. Right, and I am so glad that when I graduated, I basically took a leap of faith, and also very luckily got accepted to work in a firm that I really felt for, which is OMA. I actually started at OMA New York, and it really opened up my mind about designing, because the designing process is not about a sketch. It's not about this is what we think it should be. It should look like a tree. It was never that way. It was a lot of researching. And I wanted to emphasize researching is because we never assume we know. Even if it's super obvious that, of course, a cafe should be like this. Of course, a tower should be like that. But we always try to start from zero. And I think that is so healthy, for designers, that you don't assume you know. And that really, for us, encompasses the basis of what research means. It's not about regurgitating data. It's not about collecting images. It's really about reacting against the brief, the site, the context, even the history and economic situation at that particular moment, and even the personality of the client. Even if the brief is completely identical, because of all these forces and variables around it, the project will be completely different. And that is something we struggle and embrace at the same time, because we don't create projects that is necessarily recognizable with the same author. And that touch upon authorship. We are very, very consistent in having what we call almost like a design board. Like myself, Juan, and Chi-Yan, we discuss design. We debate design, And I think it is really beautiful in a way that all the projects sort of have a different caricature. It's because we all offer different forces, strengths and weaknesses. And I guess that sort of, we're not anti-author, but then we actually do not think it's important to say who designed it. Actually, collective designed it. Sometimes we also have very young designers coming out with amazing ideas. We'll take it, and further develop it. Of course, it sounds like fairy tale, right? And I'm not going to lie, of course, every team has a leader, And myself, Juan, and Chi-Yan, we sort of lead in different manners. We also have different strengths and weaknesses. And one thing that I think is very beautiful is that the three of us respect each other's strengths and weaknesses very well. And I feel like that is also what makes collective quite strong. Going back into the idea of apprenticeship, I would really love to share it is very important where you work. The people you meet, the project type that you encounter, even just being in a different culture, working on projects that are completely looking into different laws and regulation. That really offers amazing experiences being a more mature architect. And I guess one thing that might be very interesting to share is how sometimes internally in our office we joke about how we were, in quote, brought up in OMA versus Herzog and de Meuron. I think I'm the only one among the three actually who has worked in both places. So I actually left OMA for a bit and went to Herzog and de Meuron Basel to work for a year, because obviously they're both really great firms. They do really great work. And I was very curious. They were completely different, but absolutely complementary. Yeah, and both great places. And when Chi Yan, who has spent 10 years at Herzog and de Meuron, working with Juan and I, who have spent so many years at OMA, I thought it was an incredible party. It's quite explosive because despite we design very differently, but we have very, very similar design understanding and sensitivity. And that really resonates so strong. And then the second part, of course, is the implementation. I think most people would probably think like Herzog and de Meuron implement beautifully. OMA sort of implement things a little more crudely and more like honestly with the materials. Of course, everyone has their own feeling about it. And that was the moment when things become very interesting because there is this kind of push and pull of concept versus or plus implementation. And I think something that Collective really takes pride of is that we have learned so much and acquired so much from those two schools of thoughts. And we really am pretty insistent in implementing the concept. Yeah. And when we look at our projects that were implemented and completed, and then going back to look at some of the concept model or images, they usually look very similar. Right. Yeah. And a lot of people didn't realize it is really hard to implement a concept because inside there's so much variable of the technicals, right? The reality, money, time, sentiments, all these things. And I'm so glad Collective right now, I feel like is kind of taking the best of both schools, both worlds, and trying to develop our own language. Yeah. And we're a young firm, we're only 10-year-old, and it's been a really enjoyable process trying to assimilate what we have learned and acquired in the last 20 years. Yeah.
I mean, I think that sounds like a really trying to work out how you, if you're setting up an experiment, how you titrate, HDM and OMA and like trying to work out that kind of relationship. But I'm sure it would be like, a really great sort of, sort of partnership to kind of work that out. Also, having said that, you mentioned earlier about, a lot of the development model in Hong Kong being, very much about, like speculative development and like, how that often works is at a different scale and a different kind of speed and intensity. So how does your practice like find a space that is, both kind of political, spatial and conceptual for the kind of cultural projects that you're interested in working on?
We actually, I would always describe Collective, I hope this is a good description, as a bit schizophrenic. Because your question actually encompasses two very interesting spectrum in Hong Kong, which is real estate development versus cultural development. Yeah. And I'm not shy to use the word development. I don't think it is a dirty word. I do think it is what Hong Kong is about. Hong Kong is extremely good at real estate development. Let's not touch about the economics at this moment because the world is not doing great in any case. But then when I say Hong Kong is really good at it is because Hong Kong has really great and professional project managers. Yeah. I personally don't necessarily like working with them because, of course, that idea of only focusing on efficiency and completion does not necessarily give you good craft and result. which of course is very important for an architect. But having said that, this kind of very professional team of project managers in Hong Kong, they're very, very good at creating efficiency in development. Hence, the time that is needed in Hong Kong to develop projects compared to other parts of the world is so much faster. Does fast equates to good? No. But it does equate to economic development, which also kind of offer Hong Kong a good standing in terms of its, I guess, economic development. And that actually is feeding into the cultural development. Hong Kong has a very interesting love and hate relationship with many things. As I mentioned, we are a very schizophrenic firm. Hong Kong is filled with contradiction. It is something that we really highly embrace. And I personally also don't believe in just having one sort of character and personality. That, if you really want to like roam the world, you really need to be more adaptive, right? And the economies that were driven in Hong Kong also allows a lot of these cultural institutions to happen. And for example, for us to navigate between that, in the beginning, it was not easy. As I mentioned, we did the Christie's APAC headquarters, which is of course seen as like a really high-end project, right? But of course, there's also people who think, oh, it's a very commercial art project. But at the same time, Collective's portfolio also carries non-profit work, which we did the new space for Parasite, which is one of the oldest artist-founded non-profit art organization. And it's solely because we do both spectrum of projects that I think it's more meaningful. Yeah. I don't believe in necessarily suffering. I do believe in doing good projects, working in different spectrum of the architecture industry, because that allow us more freedom to pick the work we want to do. Similarly, with exhibition design and scenography design, it is something that is not commercial. It is something that is really dedicated to the arts, helping the arts industry to evolve, bringing the art industry's kind of representation to a higher level. These projects need support. And hence, a studio like Collective, being in the spectrum of doing all sorts of work, actually allow us the space and the possibility to work on projects that does not necessarily even break even in its finance. I don't mind I do not mind being seen not as a very sane business person because I do think architecture for me personally, it's a balance really between so-called the passion and the business. I do not believe in being a suffering artist, but I also do not believe in just completely falling into the trap of doing pure commercial projects. I am still finding a balance in between, and this is what I do every day. And I actually find that almost as a personal mission, is that I want to do very interesting concept-driven design, but at the same time, I also want to run a very healthy business so then our team can also be well paid, live a good life. Hopefully, I don't want to speak too big, but the aim is also to break this kind of a notorious cycle of being an architect, having to suffer or work long hours. We don't do that here.
I mean, in that sort of discussion between, how these large projects work, I was also reminded of this, a little quote in one of the books by Yuval Noah Harari, where he talks about how he's asking the question, like, what if efficiency is a bug and not a feature, and it was just interesting because he was talking about it in political systems and how everyone is always striving for efficiency, but often, that leads to that leads to a kind of simplification of conditions rather than, kind of plurality, which is, I guess, what, we as architects are kind of quite interested in. And he did talk a bit about, the kind of, where sort of Hong Kong sits geographically, and I've just been, over the past week and a bit traveling sort of across what's called, like, I guess, the Great Bay Area. And it's sort of interesting because, you know, it now sort of encompasses, you know, like, I think about 11 cities and 80 million people, and, you know, multiple, you know, creative economies within that. And I'm curious from your perspective of, you know, a practitioner in the area, like how do these conditions, you know, reshape your practice, or can it? Do you see this as a kind of expanse of the cultural kind of economy, or does it maybe risk eroding some particularities in the different cities, or and how do you contend with this idea? Yeah.
I think it's a situation that one just cannot avoid, so we're not going to go against it. It's, for me, it's really more a city development rather than a political matter. I mean, it's just like Tokyo. Tokyo is, if I'm not mistaken, is probably one of the biggest metropolitan city in the world. Yeah, and the city are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. No matter it's a good thing or not, it's happening. Yeah. I think the Greater Bay Area is actually completely changing how we live right now. Yeah. When I was in my teenage years, it is in the 90s that Hong Kong still has a very strong identity in relation to mainland China. I mean, the border still exists today. So before 1997, that clarity is like stark. Yeah, 1997 was a handover year. Yeah, after the handover, that border was still quite intact in terms of its cultural exchanges. Yeah, and then slowly that border becomes more porous. There's a lot of matter that contribute to it. One of the most efficient and effective way of contributing to the togetherness of the two area is definitely the high-speed train. Yeah, it is something. Infrastructure really ties city together, and as I mentioned earlier, Hong Kong is just really good at building infrastructure. Yeah, so in a way, a lot of moments are like Hong Kong reaching out to reach mainland China. Right now, the situation has switched. When I was a teenager, a lot of mainland Chinese would like to get a one-day visa to come to Hong Kong to hang out. Yeah, right now it's completely flipped. Right. It's very interesting. Yeah, it's the weekend. The border just have so much influx of Hong Kong citizen and resident heading to Shenzhen to consume. Yeah, and it's really understandable. Shenzhen is much bigger. There's much more open spaces. Also, the cost of living is lower, but then the quality of goods is, if not better, is equal. Yeah, it's getting very, very interesting how this idea of a 1 hour living circle is happening. Yeah, but then the flux has changed direction. Right. Yeah. And I embrace it. Despite I don't really spend time during the weekend to head to Shenzhen. We have recently finished 2 years ago, actually, a Blue Bottle Cafe in Shenzhen. And that was the first time that we were brought frequently from Hong Kong to Shenzhen, having to go on site and do meetings. Yeah, it really opened up my eyes a lot. And I have to say, I see Shenzhen with very curious fascination. It's somewhere that I really felt like I embrace highly because that spirit of openness, it's really, really fast and immense. I love Hong Kong very much. It's a place that I was born and raised, and Hong Kong really have this very mature efficiency that you can feel like everyone in Hong Kong act like they know exactly what they want and what they know how to like do things the appropriate and efficient way. Shenzhen is really wonderful because there's still a lot of unknown. And I feel like that positive latency is offering a lot of energy and potential for us, hopefully in Hong Kong, to test a lot of the experience and maturity that we have acquired here to bring to Shenzhen and work together. Yeah. I really love the energy of so-called the other side of the border. I really feel at ease and so full of energy and positivity, at least at this moment for me. Again, my opinion is purely personal. I'm sure everyone have a different feeling about that. But myself, I'm feeling very energized when I was working in Shenzhen on a project to see how everyone is like pushing for things like, let's go ahead, let's move forward. Yes, this might be difficult. There was never a moment that efficiency in a way becomes an obstacle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yeah, I think it, because I mean, I do see like these, very large sort of almost urban conurbations or, mega regions as being something, really fascinating because it's just because it starts to, challenge the definition of a city to some degree. Like, we're so used to looking at cities by these territorial kind of agreements, but then suddenly these things become more fluid and you almost get, a new kind of citizen, a new kind of agent, a new kind of actor that can operate across all these territories. So I think it's, and, of course, then the contrast between, your description of Hong Kong as being something that's, there's a sort of, it's constrained geographically, but then that's led to, very kind of a sort of clarity in decision making about how they deal with that, and on the other side of the border, it's almost these very elastic conditions that gives you something to kind of contest or kind of work out, like how do you position yourself relative to those more fluid conditions. So I think it's a really kind of fascinating kind of thing. One last thing I wanted to discuss with you, I'd sort of be remiss if I didn't kind of bring it up, and this was about I guess the idea of mechanical cooling in buildings, and and I'm sort of very interested in it because just walking around the city and and also trying to compare it with like say experiences in say Singapore where there's an encouragement for more passive mechanisms. I think even in Taipei and stuff where there's a different attitude towards kind of consumption of energy and so on. I think I was interested that this is something we spoke a lot about cult, and I feel like this is also something that's quite cultural. That it might one of the histories that I've understood is that it comes from a kind of colonial idea about comfort that's been reinforced by business norms and attire and so on, but now it sort of consumes about 60% of electricity usage and so on, and what happens when we start to treat a mechanical service or an atmosphere not so much as comfort, but it now becomes a kind of cultural ideology of the city.
Wow, that's a big switch of of the topic. I honestly have never really thought so much about it for the last 10 years. But since you asked this question, it does remind me when I first moved back to Hong Kong 10 years ago, I could not deal with the air conditioning. I was living in Rotterdam, and obviously the climate was very different. It was a very cool city. It's the Netherlands is just more cold, and air conditioning is not really a thing. But in Hong Kong, I guess it's very easy to be critical about how much mechanical system we use and how much AC is going on right now. But first of all, you have to come and experience the climate here. The summer is excruciating. Yeah. Obviously, climate change doesn't help, but Hong Kong is very humid and also very hot. And it's next to the sea. That wetness. A lot of times I feel like the air conditioning is not used necessarily for temperature, but for humidity. Yeah. I mean, as simple as life-wise, our laundry doesn't even dry, and it is inevitable that the people living here has to sort of rely on a mechanical system to help lives, right? Help live life more comfortably. I don't really have an answer to that, honestly. It's a topic that I'm really not an expert on. But then I think it really has a lot to contribute to the density here. And Obviously, right now, the idea of more ecological city planning or the idea of climate change is more apparent and a thing that people really look into right now. When a city was planning 100 years ago, I think a lot of these ideas were really not understood. Yeah, so tall buildings are very tightly packed. Obviously creating kind of a heat tub between buildings with strong sun. Air circulation has not been great. I was very lucky. I live very close to the mountain. So the backside of my building, I'm open to greenery and the mountain, so I can have my windows open. I try to do that with cross ventilation as much as possible, but the humidity is really a big key of why the mechanical system is really much needed to take away the water content, because that really makes you feel so stuffy, and that level of comfort is very low. But having said that, I also feel like Hong Kong, in terms of its built area, yes, there's a lot of energy being used, but again, like 78% are actually greenery. People enjoy being outside. And I actually feel like one of the current preoccupation that we have in the office, and actually for a while with a lot of colleagues teaching in a university, is the countryside. Yeah, and I've been talking about the city for like a while now, but we are really advocate of looking into the countryside in many levels. Of course, pretty much inspired by Ram Kuhal's research with his team at OMA. When I was in the office, Ram was already looking into the countryside. And a few years ago, there was this exhibition in the Guggenheim. And it was initiated by that. And now what myself, Juan, and Chi are very interested in, we also teach in a university, Chinese University of Hong Kong, running a master studio. We are going to look into agriculture. Yeah, and the idea of so-called the countryside as a surface of production. Yeah, so if we look at it, Hong Kong definitely is a culprit, a city, hyperdense. Where do our energy come from? The countryside has always been the back of house. For the longest time, across the border, China, in Guangdong province, is the factory of the world. Hong Kong has definitely made use of that to make part of its wealth by working with factories in China. And now these places, like Shenzhen itself, has become a city. And how do we actually ecologically, so-called, develop the countryside, not necessarily just have them fall into the state of production for the city? Yeah, I think that is something that we are very interested in right now, particularly in primary industry, in agriculture. And we're trying to kind of like balance a little bit the idea of creation and production. So not necessarily just saying like agriculture is good, countryside is great. Yeah. So we're looking into agriculture in terms of wine production. Yeah. So it is kind of borderline in between agricultural in a natural way or in a mass production way, creating for consumption and / enjoyment. I think that is something that will flip a new page for ourselves and our office too, to be situated in Hong Kong, but very likely looking into some of the countryside area, particularly in China, working on agricultural and wine production right now. So we are still learning. Initiated by your question, despite it's not necessarily directly related, but I do think the way to relieve the city is also to understand how we can, in quote, develop the countryside more sustainably. Yeah.
No, I agree, because I think we're sort of at that very kind of pivotal moment now in in architecture and the design of cities, where we're having to kind of renegotiate these relationships between consumption and production, and that suddenly, like, even a single building could become a producer of food and energy. Like, that's new, like, it's not been part of the history of architecture. Like, and so I think that there's so much opportunity. So it's really fascinating to hear that, that's something that you're considering in and working on through the practice, but also in that relationship between Hong Kong and the territories around it. But thank you very much
Thank
for
you so much.
yeah.
Hong Kong's architecture reveals itself not only in buildings, but in systems, rituals, and atmospheres that organize everyday life. As we've heard today, its cultural economy is not a byproduct of design, but a condition that architects like Betty Ng at Collective actively negotiate, through projects that straddle the formal and the informal, the global and the hyperlocal, the institutional and the improvised. That we can understand the city through the agency of its innovative architectural practices, and vice versa. In a city where space is scarce, regulation dense, and autonomy contested, Collective's work offers a vital lens on how cultural infrastructures can be made, quietly, incrementally, and with care. This conversation reminds us that despite tectonic density, architecture in Hong Kong is a form of cultural literacy, one shaped by constraint, sustained by collaboration, and in dialogue with the city's evolving identity. Thank you, Betty, for your generosity and insight into Hong Kong and the work you continue to do to make space, not just for culture, but for new forms of practice. And thanks to our listeners for joining us on this episode of the Super Urban Podcast. Until next time.
You're hearing us thanks to the generous support of the Alistair Swain Foundation and the RMIT University School of Architecture and Urban Design. We would like to acknowledge the people of the Bunwurrung and Woiwurrung language groups on whose unceded country we are recording this podcast, and extend that acknowledgement to all First Peoples of Australia who have been caring for the many layers of country for over 60,000 years.